Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about how men and women of God should approach the topic of modesty. Now, this is something that of course can be a sensitive topic to talk about. However, I do believe it is important that Christians can talk about it respectfully, and I think we need to have some kind of stance as to how we approach this topic. And so firstly, why is modesty important? Why does it matter what we wear, or indeed how we act, which I definitely think can be a component of modesty as well? Well, I think one component of this is that modesty reflects a heart posture that desires to glorify God rather than to draw attention to ourselves. Now, I think this makes church a context where it is especially important to dress modestly and not dress in a way that brings yourself loads of attention, especially sexually. Another component of this is when we dress modestly, it reflects humility, acknowledging our worth is in God. Now, this personally has been a factor that recently I've been more and more convicted about, especially as someone who trains in the gym. Am I really developing humility within myself every time I feel the need to flex in the mirror after coming out of the shower? Probably not. So this is something I've definitely been kind of convicted over recently. And all of that is really important. But I would say, in my opinion, the most important component of modesty is, generally speaking, are we supporting our brothers and sisters who are trying to keep their minds pure of lustful thoughts? We read Jesus speaking in Matthew 5:28, "But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully," I think this clearly applies both ways, "has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus holds a high standard for men and women of God. If it is not for your husband or wife, even any sexual thoughts you allow yourself to have is adultery. Now, for a long time, I thought this teaching was simply too much. I thought, God, how can you expect this of me in the world that I live in? The mindset I had was that God was simply holding me to unrealistic standards that were making my life worse and then condemning me when I failed to meet those standards. Until eventually I had this perspective shift, which was that when I look with lust, when I allow myself to dwell on these thoughts, I'm not simply making God arbitrarily angry. I'm harming myself and I'm harming my relationships. I create a barrier between me and God, who should be my source of strength, by treating his daughters like an object. I harm my ability to be loyal to hopefully a wife one day who will deserve that loyalty. And I compromise the stability of a family that I could one day be responsible for. Because I, like many people, have allowed my desires to control me and my thoughts rather than controlling them. So, do I believe that the immodesty of others justifies looking with lust? No. In fact, why would I want it to justify it? Since, as I mentioned, I'm harming myself more than anyone else by having these thoughts and dwelling on them. Now, something I really had to let sink in even quite recently is, no matter what women around me are wearing, not looking with lust is first and foremost my own responsibility. And there's no point complaining to God about it, which I certainly have done. Because as I say, I'm harming myself more than anyone else by doing these things, dwelling on these thoughts. I really do believe that when it comes to men, if we place the primary responsibility on women for men not to look with lust, then the only real destination of that mindset is what we get in, for example, Taliban-ruled Afghanistan or parts of Iran, where women are literally only allowed to reveal their eyes in public. And even then, they're not allowed to give men eye contact. Women in some of these places are not even allowed to speak in public because their voice can be sexualized. I mean, is that seriously the world that we want to live in? No. No, it isn't. But in light of this, I do believe that Christian women and men should be considerate of one another when deciding what to wear and how to act. So what does this look like practically in real life? Well, firstly, I think it's important to establish that context does matter. What is appropriate to wear in a swimming pool simply is not appropriate to wear at a supermarket or in church, for example. Now, this is not me saying that there are situations where modesty simply doesn't matter. However, I do believe we should simply acknowledge the fact that if a man goes swimming without a top on, most likely no one cares, because that's just kind of the norm. Yeah, I'd imagine if a father decided to strip off at parents' evening, for example, he's probably going to get quite a few looks. People are definitely going to, regard that as inappropriate. Similarly, if a personal trainer is posting progression photos of their fitness journey in order to receive clients, in my opinion, there's a level of appropriateness to that, which would definitely not be the case if they were simply singing topless as part of the church choir. And in my opinion, we shouldn't seek to push the boundaries of modesty, which I think is often what the culture encourages us to do. I think we should assess what is appropriate for different situations and act accordingly based on our personal convictions, as long as those convictions come from a heart posture that is genuine. Now, another aspect of this conversation, which I know has caused a lot of frustration, is how much more this issue is emphasised for women than it is for men. I mean, if you follow any female Christian social media influencer, she only has to mention the word modesty, and frankly, if she's wearing anything less than a full burqa, she's bombarded with hate comments from supposed Christians, desperate to judge, not righteously, but self-righteously, with pride. Now, there's no doubt to me that there is some serious attitude problem in Christian culture when it comes to this type of thing, especially online. But what I do believe is always important to acknowledge is that whenever we're assessing societal attitudes to anything, there is always a reason or combination of reasons as to why that is the case. And what I wanted to ask is, what are the reasons this is seen as more of a women's issue? And are these reasons enough to validate the gap in emphasis that there seems to be? Now, to approach this, I found kind of 3 potential reasons as to why this is the case. And I've attempted to explore how exactly this should add to our perspective. Reasons I could find for this included, firstly, that women's bodies are simply sexualized by society way more than men's are, especially in the media. For example, if you buy a fitness magazine now, but especially a few decades ago, the emphasis on the men is kind of looking jacked, kind of looking like a superhero, pumped with roids, which is a problem in itself. But the women, certainly in the past, but even now, were always marketed to be sexy, which is not the same thing as beautiful, by the way, specifically sexy. Thankfully, I do think societal attitudes to women in fitness have definitely improved in recent times, yet it remains the case that what society rewards the most, what gets the most attention to women in the fitness industry, is sexualized content. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Jesus said to look with lust is adultery. So the fact that there is a societal demand for women to produce this sexualized content shows a failure among men. Now, some will say women can't complain when they deliberately exploit this, but again, if we're harming ourselves more than anyone, frankly, who cares if they can't complain? Ultimately, if we cut off the demand, the supply will cease. Men of God, unfollow those women who post sexualized content and stop feeding your own destruction and start valuing what Jesus values. The second potential reason that I found as to why this is seen as more of a women's issue so much is that multiple psychological studies have demonstrated a higher level of visual sexual stimulus among men than in women, especially when it comes to the obvious breasts and glutes. And this is supported also by the fact that men are the vast majority of pornography consumers, with studies averaging around 70%. Now, to approach this, it may simply be the case that due to the way men and women are built, sometimes women do have more to consider. There's more room for ambiguity in terms of what is appropriate to wear, especially when it comes to items of clothing that very much emphasize the inherently sexual parts of a woman's body. However, the simple facts are that women are also attracted to men. For example, if you are a well-built man and decide to wear the tightest possible clothing in a church full of women, especially if you're preaching or on the worship team, it is unavoidable that you will be drawing attention to yourself in a way that I no longer think is appropriate, especially in that context. And finally, guys, that the third potential reason that I could find for this gap in standards is that throughout history and even today in various patriarchal cultures, forceful modesty has been used as a way to control women regarded as men's property, which seems to also be a major reason why the ability to wear more revealing clothing has been such a significant part of feminism. Now, do I even need to waste my time explaining why a woman is not a man's property? In Ephesians 5:25, Paul heavily implies that husbands should be ready to die for their wives, not regarding them like cattle. We read, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." Men of God, real leadership doesn't mean authoritarian control. It means to lay down your life as Christ did for us and put the needs of your wife before your own. Only that is the type of man that a woman of God will ever submit to. I think something we can take from all of that is that modesty is important for both men and for women. So what are my personal convictions? For myself, what should I wear, in my opinion? Well, for me right now, if I'm in a context where I'm preaching in some way, like in this video, or worshipping in church, maybe for example, I want to make it about God. So personally, I will try to avoid really tight clothing or really flattering clothing in those contexts. Similarly, if I know I'm going to be in an environment where I'll be around young women, I might make more of an effort not to wear shirts that are too tight, for example, because the risk of creating a stumbling block in that context, is increased, as opposed to, for example, if I was just around a bunch of men. However, I do believe there is a level of appropriateness to wearing such things, even when women might potentially see. For example, in some of the shorter gym content that I post, I'm generally wearing standard gym t-shirts that they are quite flattering on my arms in those videos. But the way I see it, at least at the moment, is that the context of that is a mitigating factor, as I currently believe the potential harm is outweighed by the potential good, such as potentially helping to inspire others on their fitness journeys, for example. For me, if I went to the beach, I would probably sunbathe and swim without a top on. But recently, to be honest, I felt convicted that if I'm in the company of women my own age or younger, it's probably a good idea just to put a shirt on. Again, if there's a high risk that what I'm doing is being an obstacle to someone's walk with Jesus. Now, I acknowledge that women potentially have more room for ambiguity when deciding what to wear, especially since, in my opinion, women's clothing is generally designed to be much more sexualized than men's in our society. In all honesty, I do have some idea as to what I would appreciate, for example, my future wife to be wearing or not wearing. But I kind of think as a man, it's probably best not to go into that specifically in this video. So what I've done instead is I've linked a video in the description of a fellow Christian who is a woman called Taylor Alessia, basically explaining her own convictions personally. And for me, she's got a lot of really helpful things to say that I really agreed with, to be honest. So women of God, feel free to check that out. I'll put the link in the description if you're interested. However, ultimately, guys, what I think is always the first and the most important thing is what is our heart posture. When we dress or act in certain ways, Where is our heart? We read in Romans 14:13, NIV version, something I've already alluded to in this video. Make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in the way of a brother or sister. Now, the context here isn't actually specifically about modesty. Paul goes on to say, if your brother or sister is distressed because of what you eat, you are no longer acting in love. Do not by your eating destroy someone for whom Christ died. Paul here is teaching that despite the fact that all foods have been made clean, it would be unloving to do anything that would make someone else's walk of faith more difficult. And therefore the loving thing to do is to change that behaviour around them. Imagine a more modern day example. You have a friend who's trying to lose weight. Realistically, if you're acting out of pure agape love for that friend, the loving thing to do is not to indulge yourself with foods that you know they enjoy while you're around them. And in my opinion, it's exactly the same principle with modesty. As always, guys, our heart posture is the first thing. It's not the only thing, but it's always the first thing and the most important thing that we have to assess whenever we approach these kinds of issues. Jesus says in Matthew 15:18, but the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. He also says in Matthew 12:34, the mouth speaks of what the heart is full of. And again in Matthew 23:26, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. Meaning first fix your heart on the inside, and then the actions will be shown on the outside will be good, since they're rooted in goodness. I think whenever we decide what to wear, or how to act, whether it be flirtatiously or even seductively, we should ask ourselves, what do we want by doing this or wearing this? And is what we want really what we want to want? Do you want to put sexual thoughts in the minds of women or men by what you wear or by how you act? And do you want to be someone who desires to put these thoughts in their heads? Or someone who desires for the people in your life to come closer to God? That is the most important thing. Once again, thank you guys for tuning into this video. Again, if you found value in it, please consider sharing it with someone or subscribing to see more videos like this. I also post shorter, different style of content and some gym content on TikTok and Instagram as well. So check that out if you're interested. The link will be in the description. And as always, God bless you guys.